Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile with a message for everyone paying big wireless way too much. Please, for the love of everything good in this world, stop. With Mint, you can get premium wireless for just $15 a month. Of course, if you enjoy overpaying, no judgments, but that's weird. Okay, one judgment. Anyway, give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, equivalent to $15 per month required. Intro rate first 3 months only, then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See full terms at mintmobile.com.
The left versus the right. Entertaining and informative on the Red Apple Podcast Network.
Well, I come on the air more excited to be the host of the left versus the right than any time before. And for those of my colleagues on the station that never listen to the news before it comes on the station, I have asked our great news reporter, Liz Radabali, to come in to answer this question.
Oh, I'm
You said
eager.
it's Saturday, March 14th. And what did you say right after that?
It is Pi Day.
Exactly. Now, I would like the WABC audience to know that Lisa has triggered me now. You wouldn't believe this, but I once won a bet over a period of time that I could recite 3,000 digits of pi. And I won the bet.
Oh my gosh.
This was years ago when I was young and strong, and when my acuity was higher than it is now. But what I'm going to do for the ABC listeners is I'm going to bring in the video of one of the contests I was in next Saturday. So be here next Saturday as you can hear me recite pi on March 21st, which those two numbers also add up to 3, as in Pi Day.
Huh.
So, Liz, any thoughts about this?
Well, you know, that's much further than the average person. I think most people just know the 3.14 part. Hence,
That's about it.
Hence the Pi Day. That's as far as I got. I never did any of those competitions. I'm not really good with that whole route memorization.
Well, I never was either until the bet came.
You got that bottom
Thank
line.
you so much for joining us.
Of course, thank you.
We don't want to wreck the 4 o'clock news by keeping you here too much longer.
No worries.
But thank you so much. And for the rest of you, welcome to the left versus the right. My partner is not in the studio. We're live here in the studio. He's not in the studio. He's on Kharg Island. And for those of you that don't know much about Kharg Island, the president called yesterday, and it was either between me or James, and he picked James, and I understand it. He's a Republican. He supports the president, and he led pretty much the destruction of Kharg Island in the past few hours. They've run just about everybody off of the set, and President Trump went on to claim victory, which he actually deserves from this situation. And he even said, we could have really wiped them out even more, but we're going to stop right here and let you know what we're capable of doing. So, James, how is it out there on the island?
Hey, Governor. Yeah, well, look, this is quite a view here at the location that you described. But no, I mean, seriously, what a prescient moment that occurred on our airwaves yesterday when Brian Kilmeade was interviewing President Trump and asked about Kharg Island and said, hey, you know, President Trump, back in 1988, you noted how important Kharg Island is to Iran's oil industry, and you said you would take it out. Now that you're commander in chief, are you going to do that? And Trump got a little tight. He got a little testy. He was like, Brian, that's a stupid question. Why would you ask me that? Why would you assume that I can tell you something about that? And of course, we now understand why. Less than 24 hours later, this major military operation was unleashed on Kharg Island's military installations, not so much the oil production aspect of it, but the military installations. And yeah, I mean, look, this is obviously trying to get at the big choke point, no pun intended, of the Operation Epic Fury situation, which is that Strait of Hormuz. And the fact that so much important shipping activity can be tracked just to this one tiny little sliver of water, where you obviously have the ability to do a lot of different stuff. I was reading on FoxNews.com, Governor Paterson, about the use of these mines and how it's really World War I style fighting, but it's pretty effective because those mines can be detonated deep under the water. They could obviously make contact with a ship, and either way, that could be highly destructive. So the challenges are immense in terms of trying to figure that out with the Strait of Hormuz. It's probably the kind of thing that military planners have been thinking about for the better part of 40, 50 years at this point. So we're watching that whole plan play out in real time. But yes, I can tell you that that was quite the effective military operation on Kharg Island.
And as a fellow American, I want to thank you for your participation. And you're absolutely right. That was very interesting with the president, who is different than others. He'll go on talk radio and he'll defend himself if he thinks that someone is pushing him. But apparently he was jarred by the fact that he was just about to hit the button when Brian Kilmeade asked him what he was going to do. So I have a question for you, James, because you really follow these things exquisitely. After World War II, but particularly for those of you who are listening to the station who might be a little younger, there was a conflict again in Korea, and that involved the General Douglas MacArthur, who was going to push right through Korea and take the whole place over, but was summoned home by President Harry Truman, and that job never got done. And of course, we have had issues, from that part of the world pretty much ever since. I have thought about it from the Vietnam War and President Johnson, who was out pretty much after we fully engaged in Vietnam. Then President Nixon came along, but we never got out. President Reagan, I thought, came the closest to getting us out, but President George Herbert Walker Bush from 1988 to 1992 didn't happen while he was there. President Clinton never even thought about doing it. And President George W. Bush, I think, toyed with the idea, but in the end, he kind of just didn't do it. So there seems to be something about the presidency that was altered by the command of Harry Truman that sooner or later somebody's got to break this up. And I think that somebody inevitably will be President Trump.
Well, I think that there's definitely a clear foreign policy focus for President Trump. And I think that there's a lot of disagreement and political infighting about this kind of thing right now. You know, you have the belief from some that whatever foreign military operation is launched, whether it's the arrest of Nicolas Maduro or the Operation Midnight Hammer last summer in Iran, or this most recent, Operation Epic Fury, you know, does that match with U.S. interests? And is that something that's truly America first? Is it truly something that's a MAGA decision? Because so much of the foreign policy decision-making process has also typically fallen into, well, what's this going to do for the United States? Is it going to cause bigger problems? Right now we're seeing some of these terrorist attacks unfold across the United States, and some people are wondering if that is a sleeper cell awakening in response to Operation Epic Fury. James, you touched on the situation. Go ahead, Governor.
Oh, no, I was just going to say that it almost seems to me like whether it's Republican or Democrat, this is one place where, I kind of have criticism for both parties. When these conflicts start, it's like they're sitting around a board game with a joystick, calling out what they're going to do next. But it doesn't ever seem to be anything that really creates a situation. One of the biggest differences, I think, between the way wars are fought now and the way they were fought in the 18th and 19th and 20th century is that what people try to do now is to control the war from the air. We've been striking with military planes and other apparatus that are above the ground. But something has to be said for boots on the ground, containment, and inevitably moving forward. And that's how you usually get the surrender. But here it appears to me they're trying to do it differently. And I'm not saying they're afraid to do it. I'm just saying it's evolved with all of the technology. There's a real interest in using it.
Yeah. And look, I would also love to throw this one out there, Governor, that we have the ability to take people's calls today on the left versus the right. And we would definitely invite people to chime in if they want to about the Iran war or any other situation, something that they may have an opinion on. 1-800-848-9222. 1-800-848-9222. That's the number to call us, because you're making the point right now. It kind of begs the question, what is going to come next for the situation in Iran? You had this bombing of Kharg Island, the bombing, the airstrikes, the drone strikes, whatever. This all continues. But we just learned yesterday that 5,000 more troops have been deployed to the region. And this includes some amphibious vehicles and Marines. And
exactly.
The term ground troops and boots on the ground sort of comes into the discussion and into the focus. So I don't know if that's where this is going. President Trump has had sort of a little bit of mixed messaging at times, I think, because he said that unconditional surrender is the only option, which makes sense. But then at the same time, you've had Secretary of War Pete Hegseth say, this isn't 2003. We're not trying to recreate Iraq or Afghanistan. This is not necessarily regime change. So is it just regime destruction? Is the whole idea that if you lay to waste as much of the leadership as wakingly possible of the IRGC, and then the chips fall as they may for the people of Iran? I don't know if that's something that President Trump and the U.S. military apparatus is really looking to do or willing to do. Certainly, it could generate a lot of criticism, I guess, on the international stage of, oh, you created this whole situation from a strike perspective, and then the turmoil or the chaos that results is sort of undecided. But I don't know if it's really the United States' place to have to decide that after the fact. If we take out what we deem to be a military threat, and that's how they're describing this ongoing operation, then I don't know if it's incumbent on the United States to see to the end whoever that next leader is in Tehran.
Right. And I think that's probably why President Trump has been overwhelming in his praise for how long it took to get the advantage when the war started a few weeks ago, and then inevitably the strikes. And then he can recount all the different places that have been bombarded in this particular effort. And maybe by doing that, he's given himself a little space now where he can kind of step back and say to himself and his cabinet, okay, that's what we did. Let's come to a conclusion where we should go next. And I think if that is if I have caught what I think he's planning, it's actually a good idea. You don't always have to just keep bombing away until you've obliterated your adversary. There are probably some deals, if I could use that word, that if certain Iranians that have some type of authority in their particular area of the country start thinking about, maybe, we could work with the U.S. if they'd stop blowing this place up. And that way, Trump wins the war without even having to inflict any more damage.
Yeah, that's admittedly something that I think requires that deeper knowledge of what is really going on within the country of Iran and within the populace. To me, it's kind of a curiosity. What is that next step? Is there some aspect of non-Islamic Republic government leadership that's going to take over and say, hey, we have a coalition of foreign power here. Get word to the Pentagon, get word to Central Command. We want to start talking. We have some of the ability to pull levers here that are going to put us in a better position. I don't know. It's a fascinating discussion because it's the kind of thing that the fog of war makes it difficult to really know. The Ayatollah Khomeini, for example, I've heard that he's more or less clinging to life. Doesn't have a leg, doesn't have a hand, lost his mouth in some other airstrike. So how many of these leaders are really even in a position to lead right now? Is it almost a shadow government of sorts? I don't know what the answer is to that, but it's definitely something that
James, I think sometimes one of the most thoughtful expressions to undertake at a time like this is exactly what you said. You don't know. I don't know. We don't even know if the Ayatollah, the son, is still alive. And those are information that we'll learn down the road. But I would say particularly now there is a real degree of skepticism as to what the next step is going to be. as the Iranians still act as if they don't do anything wrong and they can't understand why we're attacking them. But we're going to take that up with you in just a minute, James. But right now we are going to go to a few commercials. We're going to come back on the left versus the right. The wonderful James Flippin is either on the left or the right. I'm not sure, but they say that I'm on the left. But when I wake up in the morning, I feel like I'm on the right. So anyway, we'll be back right after these words.
The left versus the right on the Red Apple Podcast Network. The left versus the right. Entertaining and informative on the Red Apple Podcast Network.
Well, I am privileged to be one of the guests that will appear on the Cats Roundtable, John Catsimatidis, tomorrow morning from 8 to 9 a.m. Don't miss it. James, do you think I should, go home and shower up and come back, or should I just take a nap here and wait for John to show up at 8 o'clock tomorrow?
Yeah, that's a classic radio debate, Governor Paterson. You just have to ask yourself what you want to live with the most. The movement back and forth, the lack of sleep because you're going back and forth, or if you just want to have a less comfortable sleep there in the studio. So I've felt that debate. I've felt that issue myself. I'm not really sure what the answer is, but I wish you the best.
800-848-9222. 800-848-9222. James Flippin and David Paterson here on the left versus the right. In an era, James, where I think it's almost more difficult than ever to define the differences between left and right, because it just seems to me that a number of people who I assessed as having one, basic view actually have a lot of views. And inevitably, after you listen to them talk, you don't really understand what they're talking about.
Yeah, it's well said. I mean, I think of the thing that we're dealing with right now, the Department of Homeland Security shutdown, while we have these terrorist attacks touching off all over the country. You're taking away funding from the Department of Homeland Security. I mean, if there's anything more disgustingly and nakedly political, I don't know what it would be. And really what the Democrats are saying right now, and I hesitate to even use that term because that used to mean something. Now it's just the D next to the Marxists and communists of America. Let's shut the government down because of an agency that enforces citizenship laws. I mean, and they arrest violent thugs, by the way, and gang members and pedophiles and drug dealers and people who use machetes and machine guns. And this is what we're shutting the government for. I mean, these politicians are empowered by the same citizenship laws that they decry, right? They think anybody should vote. Anybody should come across the border. Anybody should have access to government resources. Doesn't matter if they're stealing left and right from taxpayers, as long as they came in here illegally. It's just so mind-numbingly stupid and opposite any sort of logic that it really does make you say to yourself, well, obviously, what a disgrace. But what is this supposed to be from a political discourse perspective? I mean, what are the reforms that ICE has to undertake for us to fund the Department of Homeland Security? I would love for the AOCs of the world or the Chuck Schumers or the Hakeem Jeffries. I mean, Hakeem Jeffries can barely put together an actual thought about what he's having for breakfast that day. But I would love to hear from any of these people a slightly coherent thought about what they actually want ICE to reform.
So, James, I think you really opened the door to an issue that's even bigger than what you described. And I'm going to use myself as an example. I was elected to the New York State Senate in a special election at the end of 1985. So I've been I was in the Senate for a long time. And at the time, there were 61 New York State senators, 36 of them Republican, 25 Democrat. So as you probably could guess, every time there was a bill, the Republicans won. About the most we could ever gain, in terms of either reciprocity or some form of equity in terms of the discussion. The only way to do that was to just get up and stall at periods of time. And I participated in that. I'm admitting it right now that I did do that. But what I never did is when the leadership was really asking for something that they knew they were going to get, and it was important to the state. And it might not have been, 100% of what I would have done in that situation because they were the leadership. And we had some problems, while I was in the Senate. One was called September 11th. And in those situations, I think you have to pull together and understand that the leaders that you elected in the legislature came from the voters who put the people in the legislature who voted for them into office, and there's got to be some cooperation. So I said all that to say this. If I was in the House or in the Senate right now, and I don't take umbrage with some of my friends and colleagues that you called out, but the fact is that how much more foresighted would it have been if they all had stood up together and said, listen, we've got a real big problem in this country right now. We're going to war with Iran, and we are going to accept what the plan was and not create a shutdown, and we'll deal with that May, June, or whenever this crisis ends. I think you create a credibility so that even your most ardent detractors say, well, I guess that guy goes home and cares about his family like everybody else. But when you start to become that antiquated and just so far away from what reason would compel you to do, you get the reaction that you just gave when you spoke right now.
Yeah, because look, the last government shutdown that we had, the last government Democrat shutdown was ostensibly tied to Obamacare. They said, we want these Obamacare subsidies extended. We're digging our heels in. We're so concerned about the state of health insurance and health care in America that we will take this step to stop TSA workers and air traffic control workers from getting paid, and all this kind of stuff will cause total chaos in the airline industry, which is, of course, happening again this time around because of the Obamacare subsidies. And it was up against the election, and people thought, okay, that's kind of a legitimate argument, I guess, Obamacare and health insurance, and everybody deals with that. This time around, it's, again, some nebulous idea about ICE needs to be reformed. But what the heck does that mean? If you got together, and you're making the good point, Governor, that if there was adults in the room, they might say, hey, look, we're a member of these Gang of Eight meetings and stuff, and we know what's going on with Iran, and the talks are underway, and we don't want to take any chances here, and this is something we don't want to mess with. That would be the adult response. But I'm not going to give the members of Congress that level of expectation. So what about just actually doing politics the right way? How about coming out and saying, look, we're so concerned about these ICE agents wearing masks and the lack of transparency and the way that causes issues with identifying agents, and if they act bad or if they're breaking the law or whatever, we want to dig our heels in and say no more masks for ICE agents. Now, this would be a major fight, right? And
it would be relevant to the issue
on this side and that side. But at least you would know what the issue was.
Exactly.
We haven't heard anything quite that clear or even approaching that from the Democratic leadership. It's just, you know what? We're not really happy right now. We hate Trump, the Trump derangement syndrome, whatever. So we're not going to fund the government. Sorry. That's more or less what's being said.
And it's, I think, in the end, to the average American, some are Republican, some are Democrat, but they watch this type of display. And that's where the failure to respect the government starts to raise its ugly head, where people start talking about not even voting and other things that they probably won't do. But for the moment, seeing results such as what we're experiencing right now, it's reprehensible. It should not be happening.
Yeah. And in protest, I'm not going to even pay my taxes in April. Oh, wait a second.
Yeah.
The IRS is knocking on my door right now, Governor Paterson.
Well, before you go, I would like to invite the audience to call in 800-848-9222, 800-848-9222. We're talking about Iran and what would be the next move after the president's victories of the last couple of days and other issues. And we're talking with James Flippin, who is distinguished himself over and over as a broadcaster here on the station. I'm just trying to keep up with him. And
and Governor Paterson, if you don't mind, I would just love to jump in quickly. You had the great Lizzie Radabali on the air at the top of the show here because we were talking about Pi Day. But I just want to say my day job as the news director thought that her newscast was excellent.
Oh,
so I just wanted to note that.
It was. That's why I had to bring her in here.
See? That's what I'm talking about. And I would love for us to get into the Save America Act at some point, because that's also, congressional, and it gets into all this weird threshold and the filibuster. And I'll just say this. I'll put it out there as a talking point, and you can respond, Governor Paterson. I know we got to hit the break in a second here, and we're going to try to get some calls in too. But is it time to suspend the filibuster? I guess. I mean, look, the modern Democrat Party, what we're talking about and what we've been saying for the last 10 minutes or so, it's just almost, you can't do it. You can't reason or do anything with these people. I mean, they tried to throw Trump in prison. They arguably engineered a false outcome in the 2020 election. I have to assume the Democrats will abolish the filibuster next if they get the power to do so. So should the GOP. It is something that I struggle with. I will say that. It is something that I go back and forth on, and I'm not really sure what the answer is.
Well, the fairness that I feel about debates and discussion compels me for most of the time to allow everyone who wants to speak to get a chance to speak. But when you are having a filibuster that lasts 5 or 6 days, to the point that you have to rotate people in and out to keep the conversation going, it takes me back to when I first went to the legislature. And at that time, my view was there should be a reasonable amount of time that each side gets to present its case, and then it's time for a vote. So I was and am coming back to being anti-filibuster. Not even without your dragging me along, James. I'm there. I hope you're happy.
I'm always happy with you, Governor Paterson. I'm never unhappy with you. I'll say that much.
So let's go to.
I may disagree with the general Democrat Party, but
Let's go to a quick break. Please join us, 800-848-9222. That's the phone number. The great James Flippin is here. It is Pi Day, and it is a blustery Saturday afternoon. Good time for discussion. We'll be back right after this.
The left versus the right on the Red Apple Podcast Network. The left versus the right. Entertaining and informative on the Red Apple Podcast Network.
Boy, they play that, easy, somber music to talk about the tennis lessons and teaching tennis, and then you get this brash, it's the left versus the right. But we are happy to be back. James Flippin is here. There's the bell. And James, I understand we have some callers.
Yes, we do on this Pi Day. Governor Paterson, the phone number to get involved, 1-800-848-9222. And let's check in with Bill from Wantagh. William from Wantagh joining us here on the left versus the right.
Bill?
Billy.
William.
All right. Well, he's not ready to go. So let's try. How about Chris from Bethpage?
Hey, guys, I'm here. I'm ready to go. So, listen, this is the biggest gulf I've ever seen between the Democratic Party of this country and the Republican Party. This is an absolute joke, the way the Democrats are handling themselves throughout this whole thing. I've been waiting. I'm 63. I've been waiting 47 years for this Iranian to pay for those hostages. Remember, every night we had to watch those poor hostages and their family every night being taken by the Ayatollah?
It was awful.
It was disgusting. And all I kept saying to myself is, I remember at the time I was a young kid. I was thinking, we're going to get him back. We're going to get him back. But you know what? They released him. And unfortunately, I loved Ronald Reagan, but they never really had an answer for it, ever. And it's been 47 years. I'm so happy with President Trump is doing to them. And to be remotely against it and to almost be rooting against this and rooting against President Trump is absolutely disgusting. It's brilliant what the guy is doing now. And he's the only one that had the you-know-what to do this of all the presidents. You know, enough of Biden and Kamala Harris going, don't. I mean, stop it now. Anyhow.
Like you're lecturing a little kid or something. But,
exactly.
Yeah.
So,
but you know,
I know you guys are with me, but I think the gulf has never been wider between the Republicans and Democrats in this country.
I think you're right. And one of the things that you made me think about was that in the Cuban Missile Crisis, which was before you were born, or right as you were being born, President John F. Kennedy, he was ready to go to war with Cuba and Russia at that particular time, and the country cheered him on. The Republicans cheered him on. And that's why, after the tragic assassination of the president, it really was a mournful country for, a couple of months. No one could believe that it happened. But I think you're right. There come times when you just have to do things you didn't think you were capable of.
And you know what, Governor Paterson, Pete Hegseth said it, I think it was yesterday, that he addressed the media bias and the way in which something as basic as America at war should really be an opportunity for everybody to kind of pull together. And it doesn't mean that you agree with everything wholeheartedly or that you don't question and debate any aspect of tactics, including getting into the war in the first place. But the little tiny, there's no semblance of the real world, it seems, from a lot of the people that are kind of just like trafficking in the world of Washington, D.C. They play in swampland. They don't really join us in the real world on any given occasion, because the concept of spending and tightening your belt when you're spending too much, obviously that's never something that federal D.C. has ever embraced. The concept of the press corps, pulling together at a time when we're at war with an adversary. Chris and Bethpage made the point. This is something that's been bubbling up under the surface for decades now between the U.S. and Iran. And the tendency for the knee-jerk armchair policy experts to say this is Afghanistan, this is Iraq, this is Vietnam, this is Korea, this is whatever. Sure, I have no problem with people saying that kind of stuff. But the way in which it's done in a malicious way from the media coverage and the snarl in the voice is really something that I think Pete Hegseth was right to call out yesterday.
And Chris from Bethpage said a lot of good things. James, who else would like to weigh in?
All right, so let's see who else we got on the phone lines today, Governor Paterson. We got Bob joining us from New York. Hey, Bob, how you doing today?
Hey, how you guys doing out there?
We're all right.
Paterson.
Thank you.
I think the world of you, because the old Democrat were the people that helped everybody with the Republicans. Now we have two separate parties. It's really disgusting, but I'm more concerned with New York State. Save America, but save New York State. We have a major issue in the city, and New York State is going to pay for all this maniac Madami thing. What can we do to get him out of there? What can Kathy Hochul do to get him out? Or what can the people of New York State do to get him out? That's what I want to know. I go back when Dominic Barinello was the chairman of the Democrats and Mario Cuomo was elected. And they worked together with everybody. Now it's like separate parties, separate, like there's a red line down the middle of the road. You're to the right, you're to the left, and there's no talking anymore. Why?
Well, Bob, what we're going to do is we're going to take a quick break and hang out because we're going to answer your question. James, we'll be right back.
The left versus the right on the Red Apple Podcast Network. The left versus the right.
Entertaining and informative
on the Red Apple Podcast Network.
James Flippin is joining us. And the question was, what do we do about Mamdani? So, James, I'm going to let you ask the question. I'm going to go to a restaurant and eat for a while and come back. And that's probably about the time you'll be finished with your answer.
Yeah, I could certainly have a lot to say about our mayor. Look, I mean, I think that for the most part right now, this is the early stages of what anybody can do about Mamdani. The truth of the matter is, Mayor Mamdani is indicative of the way the political spectrum in New York City and places like it, including Chicago and Los Angeles and some other select locations around the United States, there is no political discourse. There is no left and right. There is no center. You know, it may exist amongst the airwaves of a talk radio station and in magazines and on blogs and on podcasts, but the political apparatus of a place like New York City, go to your local council member's office and ask some questions, or look at the literature that's posted on the wall, and, you know, follow them on X or whatever it may be. And of course, I'm talking about Democrats, but that's mostly what exists in New York City. And they're of the modern iteration of Democrat like we're talking about. So I think with Mamdani and just anybody that's of the sort of socialist mindset, the effective way to combat it is to introduce the alternative, you know, make it better for the private sector to make it easier for the private sector to flourish. Now, is that going to happen under a mayor like Mamdani? Is that going to happen with the leadership in place in City Hall and in Albany? Probably not. So you're going to continue to see the Wall Street sector shrink. You're going to continue to see capital flee for places like Florida and Texas, increasingly Dallas taking on this new age Wall Street bend. But it's also just the way the world has changed, right? The internet's changed everything. More people work from home. More and more people are able to live in a place like Virginia, but still work for a company that might be placed in New York. So I think we kind of have to play the long game here and sell the upside of the private sector, of the capitalist system, of the ability for you to kind of put one step in front of the other and sell your 8 hours a day for whatever wage you're going to get or whatever return you're going to get on your investment. So there's a lot of stuff from a cultural perspective that I think we have to confront. And some of that does coincide with Mayor Mamdani, you know, with the way these Islamic terrorist attacks are continuing to pop up across the United States and the rest of the world. It's okay to be critical of that. It's okay to talk about the problems that we have with elements of Islam. And maybe it goes even deeper than that. But the phobia argument that gets thrown on that, Islamophobia, we can't let that shut it down. Because what I'll just do increasingly is to say, okay, you are MAGA phobic. You are nationalistic phobic. You have the Trump terrors, Trump derangement syndrome. Because if it comes down to a word that shuts down debate, much like the ending of the filibuster or whatever, then we're not going to get anywhere. But we have to be able to talk about socialism, talk about why it stinks, sell that argument effectively, and talk about the cultural problems that face the United States and face a city like New York. You have to talk about it openly and honestly. You can't worry about somebody telling you that you're a racist or you're a Islamophobe or whatever it may be. You got to have that open and honest discussion. So I think that the truth is there's no easy way out in terms of turning the ship around and New York City's politics. And I think you probably saw it this week, Governor Paterson, where Moody's downgraded the credit rating of New York City. And it speaks to the problems that we have. I mean, we spend too much money. And that's true of the entire state, not just New York City.
Well, I think one of there were a number of issues that went on in this country just in the last 7 days, particularly attacks on Jewish synagogues and other places where Jewish people were in attendance. And the mayor put out a press release, and I will personally apologize to him, James, if he wants to rebut what I'm about to say. It was, this has come to my attention. We're keeping an eye on this situation. Nothing involved any action and nothing involved any passion. You know, sometimes there's an attack and the elected official gets up to speak. And as a human being, they are so moved by what they have to speak about that they break down when they're trying to speak. What I got was he knew he had to say something. He knew he couldn't say something that would add fuel to the fire. So he says something that really doesn't mean anything.
You can't pretend, and you're not showing any leadership if you can't confront the elephant in the room, right? And so if Mayor Mamdani actually has any designs on being a notable figure in New York City history and American history, or, if he has any designs on being an effective leader for New York City, then he has to decide how he's going to confront this. You can't just hide from what this is. You can't pretend that the two young men outside of Gracie Mansion didn't throw glass jars and say, die in your rage, you kaftir, or whatever. I don't know the Islamic insults that they like to throw around. But, you can't hide from that. You can't hide from what's happening around the country in terms of the anti-Semitism and the way that can bleed into or does blend into aspects of radical Islam. So for him to not take a forceful stand on, and I heard Greg Kelly talking about it this week, how about standing up and saying, hey, this is what I believe in my religion. This is what I believe in my mosque. This is how we confront these issues. This is how we respond to these sticky areas of the Quran and modern society that don't necessarily blend, because anybody who's religious can understand that. A lot of these doctrines, a lot of these documents, a lot of the teachings that we rely on do trace back thousands of years in terms of human history. So if you have a working brain, you can understand some element of nuance. But if you're just going to pretend like it's not a thing, and if you're going to say, oh, white supremacy and this, that, the other, and, try to play by the typical political games, then it's not going to end well. And I hate to say it that way, but it's just not. It's not going to end well for anybody, not the least of which is Mayor Mamdani.
Well, before it ends at all, let's take another call, James.
All right, so let's see what Fred in Connecticut has to say. Fred in the Nutmeg State.
Hey, guys. Governor Paterson, I have a simple question for you. As a former Democrat, why are you, as a moderate Democrat, still supporting the Democrats of today?
That's a very good question, Fred. And what it is that I think the best way that I could try to make change is to speak what I feel is the truth and to challenge people, even in my own party, as I had wished years ago when there were some Republicans who were, they never seemed to want to think that there was any segregation in this country. They never seemed to think that there was any type of bar to people who come from underprivileged conditions doing well. So I still stick to those beliefs. Where I have, disagreed, and I think most people listening to the station would agree that I will state it. But I think if I change parties, then it makes the situation even worse because there's no one that even sounds reasonable.
Yeah, and I'll just jump. I'm not sure. Oh, Fred's still there. Fred, go ahead.
Yeah, I have an idea, Governor, and I like you. You're a good man. But in the 90s, there were a group of centrist Democrats who formed a group that was dedicated to getting the Democrats out of the insanity of McGovern and Mondale and the pro-welfare stuff they were peddling after they got destroyed by Reagan. I think Democrats like you need to vote independent, become independent, and vote whether you could vote for some Democrats who you choose or vote Republican as you choose. But unless people like you, Fetterman, the guy in Pennsylvania, Shapiro, leave that party and let that party know that they are poison, they're going to continue to be an anti-Semitic, anti-American party.
Fred, not only is it well said, but you must have ESP. And at some point I'll talk to you off the air and I'll tell you why I think you have ESP.
Well, Governor, I'd love to just jump in quickly and say that it is sort of a difficult concept and a difficult calculus for anybody because, I remember back when it was the Mitt Romneys and John McCain's of the world that were the standard bearers for the Republican Party. I didn't necessarily feel great about the Republican Party, and I remember well as a young man when George W. Bush's second term was unfolding and he was spending so much money and the deficit was continuing. And then, the Tea Party movement kind of came out of that, feeling very disenfranchised, very disenchanted with the Republican Party. And there's a lot of people who would tell you, I'm not Republican, I'm MAGA. And yet at the same time, that's because the MAGA undercurrent is what is running through the Republican Party. So, yeah, until we get away from this two-party paradigm, I tend to agree with you. I wouldn't want to abandon my original post if you tend to feel strongly about the upside of government and where it can be effective when used in certain ways, and states' rights versus federal government, whatever, all of that still is fair play, I think, under the Democrat versus Republican thing. Governor, wanted to ask you quickly if we could just shift gears.
Sure.
Have you been into the World Baseball Classic at all? Have you paid attention to the World Baseball Classic? Yes,
and apparently Sunday night will be a big night.
That's going to be a pretty intense one, because that's going to be the U.S. squad versus the Dominican Republic squad. And I mean, this Dominican Republic squad is like hitting bombs left and right. You can't keep them down offensively. But yet Paul Skeens, Paul
pitcher.
Bunyan, if you will, he's going to be the one pitching for the U.S. squad. So it's kind of like the unstoppable force meets the immovable object. And we'll see what happens there on Sunday. I think we're all looking forward to that, but also definitely the start of baseball season. There's a reason why I brought that up. It's not just a total non sequitur, because David in Livingston wants to join us now on the left versus the right. David is here.
Hi, everyone. So earlier this week, Sid Rosenberg said on his show that he's organizing a softball game between WABC and WFAN this upcoming summer. I was wondering, are you guys planning on playing in the game? And if so, what softball positions are you guys going to play?
Whatever position I play, I'll bet that team loses.
No. That is not, you are a baseball mind, Governor Paterson.
Absolutely.
I know that about you. But you are a baseball mind.
It's funny you bring that up, David, because I had thought about that. I had thought about it because, Sid often talks about sports. He's really the only one of the anchors that does. And our station has a different commitment to different issues. But, I've got to think that over. I'm going to talk to Sid about that.
Yeah, and David, as far as position, I was a catcher for years when I played baseball. And, most of the time when you become a catcher and you start wearing that equipment, they don't let you take it off. They say, oh, okay, good. You're a catcher. Good. Get back there. So chances are that I would be back behind the dish.
Oh, yes.
If that were to come to pass.
Absolutely. Well, this has been really an exciting hour with a couple of surprises here on the left versus the right with James. And James, maybe a closing thought about perhaps the optimism that you have. You don't always share it, but I know you're an optimistic person. That what could what could make us prouder about being Americans?
I think that, first of all, I want to say happy St. Patrick's Day to everybody. So I'm glad that I get the chance to do that. Chicago's river already dyed green, so our listeners in Chicago are enjoying themselves. And, of course, New York City is going to have a big celebration on Tuesday. Everybody's Irish this week, Governor. So, the luck of the Irish is spreading around. So that's a thing to be optimistic about. And, I think that there is a lot of stuff happening right now that is a painful but needed step, right? The concept of war with Iran is something that's been, many decades in the making, unfortunately. And in many ways, the power center of the Middle East in terms of population, in terms of oil, in terms of cultural influence. I mean, you want to go back thousands of years and you're talking about the Persian Empire there. This was really the reckoning that kind of needed to come. And of course, we know about the Abraham Accords and the way in which some of these, Shia Muslim, or I should say Sunni Muslim countries are kind of coming more into line with the Western influence. You can debate all you want about the Israeli influence and how wise it is to get into any foreign war. I think all of that is fair game. But I think the stuff that needed to happen is happening right now. And that's not even getting into the nuclear weapon concerns, which I think gives everybody a pause. But also here at home, right? The data shows, polling data shows that upwards of 8 in 10 respondents want federal voter ID. Even with a margin for error, that is a stunning majority of Americans who basically say, yeah, the way that I have to go give my card when I buy a bottle of wine or go fly somewhere, or if I, sign up to participate in the local school board, whatever it may be, anytime I need to give my ID, I think to myself, why wouldn't I have to do this when I vote? So if we're going to secure the elections, if we're going to really get our hands around whatever it is to have mail-in voting and vote harvesting and, the questions that everybody has about the legitimacy of elections, then we need to confront this Save America Act. And the truth is that when you have 8 in 10 respondents say they feel a certain type of way about something, that's a major mandate. And I don't know if it's going to translate right in the midterms to who gets elected and who doesn't. But over time, the American people will be heard on wanting fair, protected elections. It's not a lot to ask. It's basic democracy. And in a republic democracy like we have, you need to have legitimate elections. So it's painful, the back and forth and the debate and the inability for us to really have any cohesion in the Republican Party, for example, over something like this does make things vulnerable coming up on the midterms. And nobody wants to see President Trump get impeached for a third time. But if that's what it takes in terms of the fight for voter ID, then that's the pain that we have to go through. And I think that the optimism comes from saying, look, progress is never a straight line, right? The 250 years of American independence have included periods of struggle and disagreement and upheaval. And certainly from a political perspective, that's happening right now. But nothing done easy is really worth much, right? Everything that's hard or everything that's good and worthwhile ends up being hard at some point. So I think that's what's happening right now. And it's true on the international scene and it's true here domestically.
It's interesting how this issue, which would have seemed like an easy thing to do a long time ago, has gotten harder and harder. Now, I was originally against it until I heard the argument that convinced me forward. There's so many other things that you do as a citizen in this country where you need an ID. They want to see your picture. And extending that to voting really might inevitably actually invite more people to get involved in coming to the polls. Mm-hmm. Well, James.
Yeah, look, people want to believe that it's a legitimate game, right? They don't want to think that it's a cooked game or else they're not going to vote. And you said the same thing about the way people feel about Congress.
Absolutely. Well, James, thanks for joining us again, all the way from Kharg Island. Hopefully you'll be back in the States next week and here with us on The Left versus the Right, Saturdays from 3 o'clock to 4 o'clock. And we bid all of you a great weekend. And go John Catsimatidis. Win that supporting actor role.
Yeah,
go John, go.
Marty Supreme.
Marty.
Thanks for listening to The Left versus the Right. You can hear The Left versus the Right Saturday afternoons at 4. If you like the podcast, share it with your friends and listen anytime at WABCRadio.com and download the WABC Radio app. Hit that subscribe button on all major podcast platforms. Plus, follow WABC on social on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and X. See you next time for a new episode so you never have to wonder.
What the heck is going on here?